Hello and good evening. You're watching Malaysia Memilih. This is Astro AWANI's comprehensive coverage of GE-15 and beyond. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Hafiz Marzukhi, and believe it, we are still covering the post-coverage
We are.
the
election. Listen, yes, we know who the Prime Minister is, but we still have yet to get a lot of clarity on what the government will look like, what the cabinet will look like.
But at least there's some clarity on who is actually in the government. We know for sure there are 82 of Pakatan Harapan and Muda included, 30 BN, 23 GPS, 6 GRS, 3 from Warisan, 1 from PBM through Larry Seng, 2 independents, actually 3 independents.
Oh, okay.
Who's in opposition?
That's right. Okay, so opposition, we have Perikatan Nasional, so you've got PAS with 43 seats and Bersatu's 30. So more clarity as to what the coalition government looks like and who is in opposition. The question will be, Anwar, how will the Prime Minister tackle his first challenge in forming a coalition cabinet? How will he manage the competing interests that each party, each coalition will bring to the table?
And when we're talking about interests, there's 148 interests to be...
different interests at the table. Yes.
148 MPs, which actually shows that Anwar now has the support of 2/3 of a majority in the assembly as of now. Of course, we are waiting for the Padang Serai by-election, and we don't know where, how it will tilt the support, but it's only by +1, so it doesn't...
well, it might strengthen the 2/3 majority.
And to discuss further with us tonight, we have in the studio with us 2 of our guests. First, we have Jahabar Sadiq. He's been a journalist since 1988, and he runs the Malaysian Insight News portal.
Yeah, and if you follow Jahabar on Twitter, you will have seen his very cryptic tweets this election cycle, so we're here to put him on the in the hot seat.
Yes, and of course next to him is Arinah Najwa Ahmad. She is a senior analyst at the political risk consultancy Bauer Group Asia. Thank you to both of you for joining us.
Thank you. Welcome.
This late at night. Let's start the ball rolling. The first question, actually, to the both of you: should the cabinet reflect representation in the coalition government, or should portfolios be given according to merit? Maybe Jahabar.
Well, I think Anwar Ibrahim said there will be a very small cabinet. I presume that ministers will have more than one portfolio. There will also be 2 deputy prime ministers. I think most likely it will be on merit, but he will balance the need for representation in Peninsular Malaysia and Sabah and Sarawak because it's supposed to be an inclusive cabinet, inclusive government. And also with an eye towards state elections in some states within the next 6 months. So it'll be a very delicate balancing act. And I think most of the parties don't really want to be seen to be sitting next to each other anyway because of the state elections 6 months down the line.
Well, Arinah, what do you think?
No, I agree. I think it'll be an interesting one. Inclusivity, not just in terms of demographic, like regional representation, but also gender-wise. I think when it comes to female candidates, it's quite scarce, so I'm not sure how that's going to look like.
I think it's less than 20%.
Yeah, it is. I think now we'll have to wait for Padang Serai as well and see what the numbers... I mean, it's just 1 seat or 2 seats. Yeah, it's not much.
Clearly, the cabinet itself might not be a very gender-equal cabinet. Can I come back to what you said, Jahabar, that we know it's going to be a small cabinet, but how much smaller can it be? Tun Dr. Mahathir famously kept his cabinet size small, 24, I think, was roughly around that. And what are the drawbacks of having ministers hold 2 portfolios?
I think the drawback is whether we have the talent that can hold 1 post even. Okay. If you look at the whole coalition.
So 1 job also cannot do, now 2 jobs must do.
I think that was the case for the previous 2 governments, right? Most of them were there because they wanted to keep support. This government is different in the sense that it is a unity government. So that means they would have signed a deal, an agreement to at least stay as government for a while. Because I don't think the Malay rulers want to go through this experience so soon again. They have gone through this. This is the 3rd time. I don't think they have the patience to keep doing this Groundhog Day thing every couple of years. So what I see is that some ministries will be under a coordinating minister.
Okay,
I think that's most logical.
So to the both of you, which ministries can be streamlined? Because if you think about a smaller cabinet, it just means that some ministries either have to be combined or streamlined without actually reducing the portfolio.
Yeah.
So Arinah, are there ministries that you think we can maybe streamline?
Yeah, so I think definitely in terms of environment, natural resources, I think we did mostly. I mean, Hannah, you held, Yobiyin, everyone confuses them. But Yobiyin held, a portfolio of three portfolios, and that was split to three. So I think that's definitely one that can be sort of streamlined. I think there needs to be also some kind of re-looking into how exactly are we going to look at, economic affairs / MITI / economic council. I think there were different variations of that. So will Anwar want to have an eminent council per se, to have one that maybe not, if they want to shrink it. So maybe that's also one area that they're going to look at into streamlining it. Yeah.
Yeah, and now let's start talking about those individual ministries, right?
The key portfolios.
The key portfolios, right? Of course, one of the most important ones, definitely Ministry of Finance. Of course, the chatter in the social media, everyone has their dream pick. But of course, one of the names that always comes up is definitely Rafizi Ramli.
Yeah.
And so this basically, how do you respond to this chatter?
Well, okay, I think that there will be a balance of who takes the senior post, defense, home, finance, and education or something like that. I think, going by gut feel, Anwar will keep that post. I think a state exco makeup will be reflected in the federal cabinet. If you go to any state exco, there will be 8 or 9 of them holding excos, and they all each have 3 to 4 portfolios. I think with a unity government, you would want to keep the keys to the treasury to yourself.
Very close to
yourself, rather than hand it over to another party, for example. And someone who can understand the nuances of the society that we live in, the rural Malays, the Sabahans and Sarawakians. So I would think that he is most capable for that job. He has done it before, obviously, and he was once seen as the world's best finance minister. Margaret Thatcher said that she would have had him on her team. So I think he would keep it rather than say Rafizi. I think Rafizi would be, if he gets a role, it would be something else. Something...
what do you think it is?
Something a bit more adversarial. I can't imagine.
Adversarial?
Yeah,
what's an adversarial cabinet portfolio?
Because he's a bit more, his personality is a bit more...
Is it something like home or something?
No, I don't think he'll get home.
Okay.
I think...
MITI could be possible.
I think, he would get trade or economics, because then he would be in charge of the GLCs and all the other development agencies and cut through all the wastages and look at procurement and all that. So I think that's the kind of split that you would have.
But isn't that contrary to Anwar, the reformist, concentrating power in the executive by holding a finance ministry portfolio as Prime Minister? Isn't that what we were trying to avoid over all these years?
Unlike Dr. Mahathir, who famously said he wouldn't hold any other post, right? Anwar Ibrahim has not made any promises except to say that it will be a small, compact cabinet. And that would just give you a clue that he would have to take some other portfolio too.
You're paying attention to what's not said.
Exactly, right? Because, he's just been Prime Minister for, 1.5 days.
1.5 days?
Yes, and yeah, right?
6 hours.
Actually, yes, from 5 p.m. yesterday, right? And so today, most attention was paid on the fact that he was wearing sandals at his meeting, because it's Friday. He went to the mosque, right?
So footwear was a consideration today.
So people are looking at all the signals, right? But it's what he says and what he didn't say that really matters. And he did not say that he won't hold more than one post. He said after prayers that he has not thought about the finance ministry.
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. So that's why we have a long weekend. I think he has 3 days from tomorrow to Monday to work out with his other colleagues, other party leaders, as to what they can have and what he can apportion to everyone else, and hopefully have a list by Tuesday and hand it over to the king by Wednesday. And I probably, like Dr. Mahathir, name a very small cabinet first and then name the rest later.
Yeah. That's why he announced the public holiday on Monday. He has big decisions to make.
Exactly.
Arinah, while we're on that topic, the question that I posed to Jahabar, what about you? Finance Minister is a key post, key portfolio. Who else, if not Rafizi, do you think might fit this portfolio, if it's not Anwar?
Yeah, so interestingly, I think typically in Malaysia, MOF was held by a Malay minister, Malay personality. I think a lot of people have had, or society has had PTSD when Lim Guan Eng held the proposal. So, I mean, when it had the portfolio. So the proposal now is, should it go back to a Malay minister? So I think, although it has to be based on merit, unfortunately, that is a factor in considering, which ministers go where. So, I mean, if we're looking into, other than Anwar and other than Rafizi, I mean, within UMNO, you still have personalities like Tok Mat, for example. I think he's also a person that could be able to hold a portfolio like this. I know there's talk of Jogani, coming back, and he was in the finance ministry before, so could he come back as well? But I think there's also a lot of concern around 1MDB because he was there as well throughout that time, and the question of governance as well. Prime Minister holding two portfolios, and now you had a person who was there as well when 1MDB happened. Could there be a governance issue as well? So I think these are the personalities that are here. But if Anwar's trying to walk the talk in terms of reform and governance, then he really has to put these checks and balances into place. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, of course, Finance Ministry will be closely watched these next few days. But other than that, the other portfolio we have our eyes on is definitely education. And there's a lot of reforms and attention needed in this particular portfolio. Same question to both of you: who can make it? Is it something that Anwar has to think about? Maybe he taking it himself, or give to other. But
he was education minister.
He was, yes.
But it was a different decade,
a different
time. The education portfolio has evolved. The times have evolved, so you kind of need a minister who has evolved. Also, I mean, we all know the issues within our education system, and there's no denying tough reforms.
And it has actually gotten worse during the pandemic, right?
I mean, the reality is every education minister puts out a slew of reforms and never gets to see it implemented, because then the next chap comes and leaves his legacy. And so that's why we are left with the education system that we have. Not so much because of really the policies. I think it's because it's the quality of teachers that you have. They might not have an interest actually in teaching. They were not capable and able to teach during the pandemic. They can't teach in front of a camera, for example. So I would reckon that Anwar will have a lot of thoughts about this, and he would most likely, I think, give it to someone from Barisan Nasional, or as a confidence-building measure, even someone from Sarawak, because Sarawak is going to insist that they want English as a medium of instruction, and they have managed to do a fair bit for their schools in Sarawak. They've protected themselves from us Malayans.
But also maybe relook the way the curriculum is so Malaya-centric, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so I think it might be someone from Sarawak.
Interesting
Who
proposition.
it is, I don't know.
Okay. Arinah, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, he stole my answer. I was actually thinking someone from Borneo as well, because I think, looking at the other portfolios, I'm not so sure actually of who can actually helm, but maybe there could be discussion around, what from Warisan as well, like who from Warisan could be holding, some of these seats.
Is this a sensitive portfolio, do you reckon? The way that you pointed out that previous finance minister, that there legacy issues there was optics issues there. Is education one of those portfolios that are considered sacrosanct, that must remain with certain parties, with certain races?
Of course, because you are in charge of a fair number of teachers, right? 200,000-300,000 teachers or more, and they have their job is to mold young minds. One of the things that this government has to do is voter education. Because every year 500,000 people become voters at the age of 18. So next election is in 5 years' time, if not any sooner. So that's 2.5 million more voters, right? So you would want someone who can do that job maybe in a rather apolitical way. Someone who will not benefit from that 2.5 million voters, and naturally that would be someone from Borneo.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. And moving on, of course, the next portfolio is, of course, home, another sensitive one.
Ooh.
You know, a lot of power.
Yeah, a
Immigration.
lot of power, a lot of opportunity for reform as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, will it go to one of his, like, will it go to one of PH, or, you know, something that could be used as a leverage with other coalition partners? What both of you think? Arinah?
I think typically also we saw, I mean, I don't know whether Hishamuddin might make a comeback in whole.
He was a home minister.
He was a home minister, so I don't know whether he will make a comeback in that area, and that's typically what his portfolio has been. But given the scandals recently, again, around LCS and, you know, all these things, so again, I think it's also a question of how do you balance the portfolios with ministers that, you know, have some of these issues, because Anwar has also said, you know, I want to make sure it's a clean cabinet, as clean as possible. So how do you, you know, going back to the point of talent, right? You want to balance values versus merit and competence. So sometimes the more competent, or the ones with most experience, don't seem to be a bit tainted in that sense. So how do you balance that out? But some of these personalities will come through. So I think, you know, when it comes to Hishamuddin, I think he's one, you know, from Barisan Nasional. I don't know if anyone from DAP is willing to go and take up that role. I think Chin Tong previously was in defence, so
Deputy Minister.
Deputy Minister. So I don't know whether he'd be promoted, you know, again ahead of Minister. We're not sure. But these are, you know, we tend to pigeonhole some of these ministers. But you know, there could be a surprise.
But
right?
just wondering, would Hishamuddin actually enter the cabinet, even if he's proposed? Because, you know,
He's
judging
been vocal.
from
He's been vocal about
okay.
his opposition, right?
his opinion. What do you think, Jahabar?
I don't think he'll be in the cabinet. I think the cabinet will represent the wishes of the party president, or the Barisan National Chairman. I don't think anyone outside his list of supporters would actually want the job or get the job.
You reckon Khairi Jamaluddin might not make it back in cabinet?
I don't think they will waste their senatorships.
I mean, as a senator, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they'll waste their senatorships on certain candidates, losing candidates, because they would want to also open up diversity, in the sense that maybe they want to use the senatorship to bring in more women in right. Parliament and also in the cabinet.
So here's the discussion about kind of track record, right? So the chatter again on social media is that everyone thinks that, oh, Khairi, because of his performance as health minister during the pandemic, probably stands a good chance to come back as health minister because of the track record. But we also have Dr. Zul, you know, who has a track record as well. How do we think about those kind of competing, as you said, talent and track record and merit, because we have ministers like Anthony Lok, who performed very well as transport minister? Do they get pigeonholed into, you know, these same portfolios?
Yeah, I think they do to a certain extent, but it also depends on, you know, we're also saying these things because based on what they campaigned, right? So during campaigning time, Dr. Zul was talking about, you know, healthcare. I mean, same when Mazli was campaigning, he was talking about education as well. But, you know, there could be surprises like what happened with KJ when he was put in terms of in health ministry. But then you see some ministers, I think Hanayo was still fighting for women's ministry because that's what they care about. So I think there is some argument to, okay, maybe let them keep those portfolios because it's what they care about, that's what they're good at. But given the lack of talent, the pool is a bit smaller than usual, a lot of considerations come in, so there could be some surprises.
Jahabar brought a very interesting point about, you know, the president's man. How important it is for the Barisan National President to be in this cabinet, and at what level should he be in? Because analysts have said that in order to maintain the stability of this government, it is important that the Barisan National President is at a good position.
I don't think so. I think that's really nonsense. I think that most of the party leaders might not even be in the cabinet. The ones who are not part of Pakatan Harapan. And for that matter, I think even someone like the chairman of DAP, Lim Guan Eng, might not be in the cabinet. Anwar Ibrahim is trying to bring in a different style of governance. He said a lot about it, and he's kept insisting it's a small cabinet. With 148 people in his coalition, 2/3 majority, I would think he would just take 20%, which is 28 people or 29 people.
Shouldn't it be according to the seat representation?
No, of course it is.
DAP has 40 seats, therefore ought to have 27% of the seats in cabinet.
But you see, we are not the Prime Minister, are we?
Yes, I'm playing fantasy cabinet.
We are looking from a very logical point of view. The logic is by your proportion in the coalition, right? But I think Anwar Ibrahim has a different calculus on how he's going to get his numbers.
Yeah.
And also, whoever we name will have to get an approval from the king. Right? The king will look at the list.
Yeah.
Right? And the king will say, no, I don't think this guy is suitable. I mean, this is how the king got these guys together to form a government after 4 days. So I think there will be some guiding hand from Istana Negara as to the kind of people who will be ministers, because they're looking at a long-term future of the country and the government. If you read the palace statement, he was very careful to say not everyone who wins
won all,
or everyone who loses, loses all. He was careful to say, your job is to take care of this country for the future. So it'll be very tempered by some realization that not everybody in that team wants to play with each other or wants to play together. Right? They're there because it's convenient so that we can have a government. And some of them will have to sacrifice the job, right, for the greater good of the team. Also, Anwar Ibrahim has said that he'll cut pay. He won't take pay.
Yes.
So I don't think it's attractive to a lot of people to take the headache of being a minister at half pay.
Yes.
Might not even have an official car anymore or any kind of escort.
amidst recession.
Right, amidst recession. Might not have the bad boy to carry his bag. Or even probably even an ADC for some of them. So you're looking at a completely different proposition from yesterday in Malaysia.
All right, we're going to come back to this conversation about cutting pay and all the what the government and cabinet might look like. We're going to take a quick break, but we will be back after these messages. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Malaysia Memilih. This is Astro AWANI's comprehensive coverage of GE-15 and beyond. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Hafiz Marzukhi.
We've got Ira Azhari on the line. She joins us now from the US. She's a senior manager of research for the Democracy and Governance Unit of the think tank Ideas Malaysia. She's currently doing a Fulbright exchange program at sunny Albany, where she is joining us. Good morning, Ira. Thank you for joining us early in the morning. Let's begin our conversation with a look at the cabinet composition. What might that look like in your opinion, given that we know PH has 82 seats, so technically that should represent 55% of seats in cabinet?
Hi, everyone. I had a chance to listen in to the conversation, very interesting conversation earlier about this cabinet appointment issue. I must say I do not envy the new Prime Minister's task of trying to balance between having this so-called smaller cabinet with the not so small number of MPs, I'm sure, who are interested in these ministerial positions. So I think just balancing between that would be challenging. But I think I would just like to point out something that maybe hasn't been mentioned yet, which is besides competency and sort of trying to balance the different parties, another thing that needs to be considered is, can these individuals who will eventually be ministers, how do they understand how government works, and how do they get along with, say, civil servants? Because I think one of the feedback of when PH was in power for 22 months was that, many ministers, of course, they were first timers, but it was very challenging for them to really understand the sort of how the bureaucracies work and how civil servants civil servants need to working with civil servants across the board. So one of the feedback was precisely that many of them couldn't understand it quickly enough. So I think this is really important to be considered and shouldn't be taken for granted, really, or else governing would be very difficult. Yeah.
Ira, it's a very steep learning curve to be a cabinet minister, of course, but technically, everyone within this 148 MPs, I wouldn't say everyone, or the parties within this coalition government have tasted or have experienced some form of governance at one point within this past 5 years. What other considerations should the Prime Minister have in selecting the person in charge for each of this portfolio? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's really important to have, individuals who are able to have that longer-term vision, sort of longer-term policy plans for Malaysia, because, the last 2-3 years has been just so disruptive to our daily lives, to our economy, to the jobs sector that we have. So, just having that really like long-term planning, I think is really important, and I mean, my biggest hope is that this government lasts its term, and I hope, ministers actually behave like it is going to, the term is going to last, and, really have that kind of planning and that strategy to get Malaysia to back to where we need to be. And yeah, I mean, the world has changed a lot since the last 2-3 years, right? So how do you grapple with that? Yeah, I would really like to see that.
Ira, everyone's watching who's going to get the finance minister portfolio. Do you think it's going to be Rafizi Ramli?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people want that portfolio as well, and probably he would be one of them. So I did read, the Prime Minister himself, I don't know, might consider being the finance minister too, since, this is whole making the cabinet smaller issue. So, yeah, that will definitely be one of the hotly contested seats, probably between, probably it will be between PKR and UMNO. Might be between those two.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, which portfolios do you think will go to Barisan Nasional?
Right. So that's an interesting question. Finance actually, probably. I don't know. Might be one of them, or I would say maybe one of the senior ones definitely will need to go to. At least one of them go to the BN leaders, education, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, that's about the cabinet. But on the other side, the opposition. What do you think PN would be like as an opposition?
Yeah, so I think that is the other big thing that we need to look out for. Yeah, so we must remember that PAS has the largest number of seats in Parliament at the moment. And, PN is going to be a formidable opposition. My slight concern is that, when during the 22 months of PH administration, we did see that, opposition then, UMNO and PAS, really sort of took advantage of that to stir up, a lot of race and religious sensitivities. We had the anti-ISIT rally that was... that kind of shocked everyone. So, and of course, the trends that we've seen leading up to this election does show this increasing use of race and religious rhetoric, which obviously is harmful to society. So I think this is something that needs to be tackled quickly from within the government. So I would say the appointment of the Minister of Religious Affairs would actually be really important. Right, because it needs to balance a lot of things. Right, this individual needs to be quite progressive, but not too progressive. Someone who can, be very firm on going against some of this, all of this religious rhetoric that we've seen, but also someone who can sit on the same table with the opposition to really work out. What we want to do for a better Malaysia. So I think...
does anyone come to mind, Ira? As you're describing this, does anyone come to mind?
Okay, I actually had a discussion with some of my friends last night about who might be good for Minister of Religious Affairs. You know what? It is really tough. I don't know. I was thinking of a few figures. But yeah, I mean the previous Dr. Mujahid lost his seat. Yeah. Fuzia Saleh lost her seat. So it's I don't know.
It's a tough one.
Ira, do you think there's a possibility that the Prime Minister may actually reach out and get someone like a mufti or someone else, you know, someone who has religious authority to sit in the cabinet for that particular position?
Yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, you know, you guys were talking about senatorships earlier, so maybe this is something that he can use. The Mufti of Penang, I think, has been speaking out a lot, I think, against, you know, religious extremism. He is seen as one of the more progressive muftis that we have. So he's the only one I can think of that might be a good fit. Yeah.
Well, something you said earlier really intrigued me. You talked a little bit about making sure that this administration gets the buy-in, gets the confidence of the civil service to ensure good governance, because that's really the first step. And that was perhaps one of the missteps from the previous Pakatan Harapan government. What would be the best way to go about doing that?
So I think, you know, the civil service is, you know, has its quirks and it's very hierarchical, just like any other organization. But also, you know, it's complex and it's big, right? So it's not just hierarchical, but there are a lot of nuts and bolts to really understand how it works. So I would say, if I was a minister, I would really sit down with the top civil servants from that ministry and really, you know, get a rundown of how things work and, you know, really understand on whose toes not to step on, you know, what you need to do to get things done or to make decisions. Because I think in the civil service, this punca kuasa is a very important thing. Right? You need to know where you derive legitimacy from when you make decisions. So this is really important, and you just need to work really quickly. Start now, you know, start talking and getting their buy-in now, really. You don't have much time to do that. Yeah.
I mean, Ira, so far we've been talking a lot about cabinet positions.
Yes.
Now we would like to move on to outside the cabinet, or more specifically the Speaker of the Parliament. Any individuals come to mind when we speak?
Will Harun get to keep his job?
Yeah, so another one of the more exciting appointments, I think. So if you ask me, I think Tan Sri Arif during the Pakatan Harapan administration introduced many new initiatives in Parliament. You know, he really opened up, firstly, Parliament to civil society, to the public, you know, put in all the parliamentary select committees that we need. So I think, you know, we need that kind of sort of transformative, visionary kind of speaker who really understands what Parliament should be, Parliament's role. So I'm quite interested to see if anyone has approached him to you know, return to the speaker seat. Of course, this is something that needs to be voted on by the House. One of the first things the House needs to do, actually. So yeah, so I hope, you know, we can have a speaker like that once again. We'll see. Yeah.
The last time Pakatan Harapan was in Putrajaya, there were a lot of expectations. Some say unrealistic expectations, but how quickly reform could be implemented, especially after decades of one-party rule. Do you think that this time around there's a more realistic expectation? Do you think there will be a grace period, a honeymoon period according to this new administration? Or is the urgency, is there more urgency now because Anwar has 2/3 majority?
So I think the answer to that is I do not think people are more patient this time around. In fact, I think people are more impatient. But what I would tell the people is, firstly, you know, yes, reforms, especially institutional reforms, need a lot of time. But what I hope to see, this is another thing I hope to see from the cabinet, is just a greater communication and explanation of why these things take time. So, you know, and I know the PH government previously had the National Anti-Corruption Plan where they had timelines and everything, but that's not enough. It's like you really need to go out there and communicate what you want to do and why this will take time. And yeah, you need to just use all means of communication that you have available to say this, because yeah, I mean the public's patience is not, you know, we're not going to be more patient, I think, especially I think in terms of the sort of more cost of living promises, cost of living policies that needs to be implemented. Institutional reforms, I think, they do have a bit of leeway. I think mostly civil society organizations will be keeping a watch on that, which is why it's important for any cabinet to, get CSOs in and keep communicating with them on what's the progress of some of these reforms that needs to be done. So communication is key. I hope that's one thing that the PH folks have learned from their first administration, that if they don't communicate, people won't know, and people just think that you're not doing anything when actually you have. So I think that's one huge thing that they need to do.
Right. Thank you, Ira, for joining us on the show tonight. Ira Azhari there from Ideas Malaysia. We're going to take a very quick break here on the show. We'll be back with more with our guests in the studio. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Malaysia Memilih, Astro AWANI's comprehensive coverage of GE-15 and beyond. You with me, Hafiz Marzukhi and Melisa Idris. And with us in the studio tonight, we have Jahabar Sadiq, who's the editor of the Malaysian Insight news portal, as well as Arinah Najwa Ahmad Said. She's the senior analyst at the political risk consultancy Power Group Asia. All
right, so let's come back to the conversation. We spoke to Ira Azhari a little earlier. She had some interesting thoughts, but before we kind of respond to some of her thoughts, earlier in our conversation, Jahabar mentioned that he reckons there'll be 2 DPMs, one from the Borneo bloc representing. Arinah, what about you? Who do you think will be the DPM likely from Barisan Nasional, and who might be from the Borneo bloc?
I think from Barisan Nasional, a strong candidate right now is Ahmad. I think he's sort of cleaner in comparison to the other candidates right now. If we're looking at Borneo, I think Shafi'i could be an option, but I don't know how that plays out within his relationship with Anwar. But I think these two are so far strong candidates. I would love to have a female DPM again, but I think there's conflict of interest because he's married to the former DPM.
Yeah, sorry, forgot about that.
Yeah, so I don't know whether that will, cause some stirs, but I think that will be an interesting one.
I think she might be speaker.
Yeah.
Do you think, speaking about conflict or speaking about family, Nurul Izzah didn't win her seat, but had a track record as a minister performing in that role. What do you think, she might make a comeback into
I don't think she'll make a comeback. She was never in the previous government. Right. I think because she lost, and Anwar wants to be seen to be very fair, and he can be very fair. I think he will keep it tight, no family members in his cabinet, because then when he goes home, there might be issues also. But I think Dr. Wan Azhar could be speaker. Yeah. Could be speaker, because then you're bringing more representation for women, right, in parliament.
But wouldn't you consider that conflict of interest?
No, I don't think so, because speaker is elected, right, by the MPs, right? The speaker doesn't have to listen to the prime minister, right? But I think there is a possibility of that, unless they want to bring in any other women as speaker. Hannah Yeoh used to be speaker of the Selangor State Assembly. Azalina too, right? So there could be some leeway there as to one of them, if they don't get a cabinet post, they will get something in parliament. And I think that's one way of strengthening parliament, because you have a robust, you have a 2/3 majority now as it stands. And that just confirms Anwar Ibrahim's numbers of strong, formidable and convincing numbers, right? Yeah. It finally came true. You would need someone strong in parliament to make sure the debates go well, and you're fair to the other side too, right? More so because the other side is the northeastern crescent of opposition. Right? Most of them are from Perlis, Kedah, Kelantan, and Terengganu, and some in Johor and all that. So it'd be important to make sure that Parliament also performs its role. And the other reason is because the 2 top leaders of Perikatan Nasional have the worst attendance record in the previous Parliament, right? Yeah. I think Muhyiddin, maybe because he was unwell, 28 out of 80 over days. Hadi Awang was 25 days. So people keep track of this, right? People outside, the ones who are playing fantasy cabinet now. So I think that'd be very important to see the performance of the opposition in not just opposing for the sake of opposing, or as Arinah was talking about ICERT and all that, playing their role to make sure that we have a robust parliament and keep this government in check.
Other than Dr. Wan Aziza, do you think there's a possibility that Anwar might even like extend another olive branch to Perikatan Nasional and supporting Perikatan Nasional's candidate for speaker, just to, you know, show a sense of
that's possible. But you also remember that the opposition now gets the PAC chairman's job.
Right. Okay.
So you have all the select committees and all that. They play a role there. I think probably be someone very impartial. If it's not any of the women MPs, it'll be someone very impartial out of the system. Seem to be fair to every side. Art Harun, I mean, he's a personal friend. He's a decent bloke when you see him, when you have lunch with him. But I guess in Parliament, everybody was just coloured by the fact that he came in after the Sheraton move. So, you know, when you see large numbers of politicians in hotels, you just have to worry about the country.
Okay. All right. So, kind of frank talk. Who would you like to see in this cabinet that is currently not an MP?
Not an MP.
Arinah.
Well, I think KJ still has, you know, I mean, he did a lot of work during MOH. And I mean, it's not an easy job. I mean, granted, yeah, there were some concerns around, you know, accusations of also corruption and all that. But overall, I think now, given this administration, the pressure on governance, I think that's one.
Okay. Could I just ask you on that KJ's role? Because we have the UMNO party elections coming up soon, and he could be a challenger to Zahid, right? Would that be then Anwar Ibrahim hedging his bets against, you know, future party leadership by bringing him into cabinet? Any thoughts?
No, I don't know whether it's more of, you know, because number one, I think within UMNO itself or within BN itself, it's already likely to be a bloodshed, like, you know, coming up within PAL, coming up here, because there's a lot of dissatisfaction amongst the grassroots with how Zahid behaved vis-a-vis, you know, how Hishamuddin also responded with his own statements. So I think Anwar might be best to kind of stay out of that, I think, personally. I don't think he's hedging his bets, because even though there is majority, but it's still very fragile. Right. Like Ira said, we hope that it will last another term. So I think it's best if he just keeps out of it and just does based on what he thinks is, you know, based on merit and based on competence. But yeah, maybe Jahabar might know more.
I think, as I said earlier, it's the president's man. So maybe someone like Ashraf Wajdi might come in as a senator and take the religious portfolio role.
He was a deputy minister.
He was deputy. So there would be roles for people like that. But again, it's the president's list. It won't be any other list. Because, again, as she said, Anwar wouldn't want to be caught in the crossfire of the UMNO elections, which will happen in 6 months' time. It's slated for May next year, if I'm not mistaken.
6 months from...
The AGM is 21st to 24th. And they are looking at after Hari Raya. And I think after the state elections, too. So there's a lot of potential minefields out there for this government, state elections, party elections, and I don't think Saudara Anwar wants those kind of distractions because it will just derail what he wants to do, which is economic issues and getting the government and country back on track.
Yeah, extending from that point, I mean, any technocrats within the current
good point.
within the current lineup, maybe because if he can't put Barisan Nasional, GPS, everyone wants a position, it's like, okay, let's get someone outside to fill in the role because I need a cabinet which delivers. So what are your thoughts on
any
him
more bankers going to join cabinet, you reckon?
You know, if you look at the history of bankers in Malaysian cabinets, they don't end up well. Right, from Amin Sham's days and all that. None of them end up well.
That's I mean, depends on how you define well.
Well, they don't end up well in the sense that they probably can only serve half a term. Right?
And political shelf life.
Exactly, yeah. So, because they're bankers, right? They make unpopular decisions, if anything. And any decision they make will satisfy one half and not the other half, right? So, no, you want to put a technocrat, be someone like Dr. Zul, he's already there. right? He's a professional, right? So you want to get those kind of people in with no political ambition.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to get someone in who thinks, okay, it's an easy way to jump in, then I'll just helicopter my way here and there, and then before you know it, I could be a prime minister. No, I think this government will not have the time to do that or the kind of clout to do anything like that. Their job is to make sure this country moves forward, bounce back from the pandemic, and for Anwar to prove that, you know, he should have been prime minister more than 20 years ago, that he was derailed. He's becoming prime minister in a completely different world. He's 75 years old. We've gone through a pandemic. So
it's not a majority government.
It's not a majority government. And you know, he's not exactly finance minister material too, because he studied language in University of Malaya, right? So he understudied a lot of people. So he has ideas because he's from the streets, right? He's from the other side of the railway line, right? He's not one of the elites. People think he's an elite because he went to MCKK, but he isn't an elite. He's not Bangsawan, UMNO, or whatever, right? So I think that's his focus. He's going to choose people he knows very well to run the cabinet and the country. Yeah.
Arinah, what did you make of what Ira said a bit earlier, that the #1 challenge would be communication, communicating to the wider Malaysian public why reforms, why change will take time, which is something they failed at the first time around?
Yeah, I agree. And I think communication here takes two parts. Like one, it's within the ministry and within the government. I think we saw in Pakatan Harapan, there wasn't a lot of cohesiveness. That's why we saw, Hafiz is smiling at me. So we didn't see a lot of cohesiveness when it comes to, you know, the ministers and the deputy ministers talking to each other and then also working together with the civil service. So that's why you see a lot of leaks, a lot of deep state kind of accusations where leakages were coming out of conversations or tenders and all these things. So I think that's one. And then the second part is communication to the rakyat. Because if you are not aligned, and let's be honest, like Pakatan and, you know, UMNO or Barisan Nasional have been long-time adversaries. So what then would be that middle ground or that narrative that you're going to share to the rakyat so that the rakyat are confident in that, you know, this is a great government and a competent government that's going to last 5 years? Because that's what happened with Pakatan. There was a lot of internal scramblings. The rakyat was just very confused. There was too much information going out. So I think here that challenge is, what is that solidified narrative? So that's why I think, you know, economic issues is a strong one, right? Your bread and butter issues, this is why we need to get Malaysia back on track. COVID is still very much a thing. So I think these are the more objective things that the government can push forward, and less bickerings on the more value-based stuff between the two coalitions.
Do you reckon that the bickering might be an issue, given that we have a coalition government, a coalition cabinet? You know, not everyone will see it. And you might not necessarily get along, even though you are in government. Might we see more bickering? We
might see, but there needs to be that strong hand that says stop. Right? So I don't know whether in Pakatan there was that strong hand to be like, no, you can't stop doing this, which is why Barisan Nasional Government, that was very good, because everything came from a more of a hierarchical top-down approach. Your communication is centralized. It's just one source. Everything needs to be cleared with, you know, the higher-ups, your stratcoms. But here, that still needs to be, you know, cleared up. And I do see, even with, you know, when Anwar was announced as Prime Minister, you still, you know, in some of my Barisan Nasional groups, you still see them talking badly about the of Pakatan Harapan, you know, even though you're now technically the same team.
Muscle memory.
Right, so it's muscle memory, right? It takes time. Onboarding tak siap lagi, right? You know, you need to adjust to the fact that you're now, you know, working on the same team. So I think that will definitely take some time.
Speaking about communication, of course, this is not considered probably one of the most critical or senior portfolios, but communication and multimedia, how will we be treated this time around by Anwar? Will he choose a senior person in that position? Will he choose a more younger person to reflect the current needs? What do you think, Jahabar?
Well, I think I said earlier before we came on air that he loves media. So I think he will put someone younger, someone who's well versed with social media, with what's going on and how people are getting information in the country, and the disinformation and misinformation that's going on. He will put someone who, in his mind, is with it, and also might have a bit of a religious background. Because the front you're fighting, and this is why I think this government can last, is they actually have a common enemy, right? And that's Perikatan, right? During the election campaign, Perikatan and Pakatan had a common enemy. Barisan Nasional. But because of the results, one side has decided to, for lack of an easier way of saying it, to sleep with each other, right? And that would mean that you know, everybody gets a role in that bed, right? Yeah. So that bed remains as it is with all of them together. Very
descriptive. Thank you.
Sorry.
You've probably been covering Anwar far longer than all of us, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, I think so. 1988 is like a long time to be a journalist.
Yes, yes.
What do you think we need to watch out for in his administration?
See, the Anwar 1.0 was very nice, very polite guy, right? And then of course he got more power. Then he gets all these people around him that sort of think they are riding on him, and they make him look a bit more less polite, less approachable. And so then the love affair with media is gone, or the media doesn't like him anymore. I think what we have to watch out for is that he's not that kind of Anwar anymore, right? So but he will still surprise us because we are so used, I am so used to writing, sacked deputy prime minister, jailed opposition leader. That's how I
that's his identifier.
Yeah, that's identifier, right? Now to say Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, for a lot of people it's joyous. For me it's difficult because my muscle memory says this, right?
Opposition leader.
Yeah, so I see from that point of view. I see Rafizi from that point of view of criticizing government, and because when the Pakatan Harapan government was there in 2018, both these two gentlemen were not part of the government. Right? So whatever I think about it, it'll just be a complete surprise, you know, because he is not that guy who was sacked in 1998. He's not the same guy anymore.
I guess we'll just have to discover for ourselves.
Exactly.
Thank you both for being here with us, spending your Friday evening with us. Thank you for that. And that's all we have for you on this edition of Malaysia Memilih, our GE-15 coverage and beyond. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Hafiz Marzukhi, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.
Good night.